Imagine two people, each starting with the exact same $100,000. One buys a rental property, the other puts it into a stock index fund. 30 years later, one becomes a millionaire. The other also becomes a millionaire, just not in the way most people expect. So who actually won? Here's the honest answer. It depends. And almost nobody who argues about this online actually explains on what. Your uncle will tell you real estate is the only investment that's ever made anyone rich. A finance influencer will tell you stocks have crushed real estate for a century straight. Both of them will show you a chart. Both charts will be technically true. So let's actually go through the mechanics. Not the confident one-liners, but the parts of this debate that usually get skipped. On paper, this debate looks embarrassingly simple. Stocks return around 10% a year. Houses return around 4%. End of discussion. Except, that's not actually what happens in the real world. This is the part nobody mentions on social media. When you buy stock, you own exactly what you paid for. When you put a down payment on a house, you own the entire property, financed with borrowed money. This is leverage, and it's the single biggest reason this debate gets so distorted. Think of it like a lever under a boulder. A small push at your end moves something far heavier at the other. A modest rise in a leveraged property's value can turn into a dramatically larger return on the cash you actually put in. But a lever works both ways. A modest drop can wipe out your entire down payment, and you'd still owe the bank the difference. Stocks can technically be bought on margin too, but almost nobody does it at that scale, because the risk is brutal. A margin call can liquidate your position within hours. A bank foreclosing on a house, by contrast, usually takes months. Small detail, big consequence. Real estate leverage tends to be far more forgiving during a short-term downturn than stock market leverage. And this is where millions of people make the same mistake. They compare the unleveraged stock return to the leveraged real estate return, as if they're the same kind of number. They're not. Now factor in something most casual comparisons skip entirely: cash flow. A rental property doesn't just sit there appreciating. Tenants pay you monthly, and that rent either covers your mortgage and expenses or puts real cash in your pocket on top of whatever the property is doing in value. Dividend-paying stocks do something similar, but the yields are usually much smaller than what a well-run rental can produce. This is one of the few places real estate has a genuine structural edge. It's an asset that can pay you and appreciate at the same time. But everything sounds amazing until one thing goes wrong. Picture this. Your tenant leaves with no notice, 2 months before you can find a replacement. Meanwhile, the water heater dies, the roof needs patching, and the property tax bill arrives. All in the same season, the unit sits empty. None of that shows up on the simple real estate returns 4% a year chart, but it shows up in real life, constantly, and it quietly eats into the return in ways a single number never captures. Stocks, by comparison, ask almost nothing of you once you own them. No tenants, no 2 a.m. phone calls, no roof. You can hold a diversified index fund for 30 years and never think about it again, and it will keep doing exactly what it does, whether you're paying attention or not. There's also a liquidity gap that rarely gets its proper weight. If you own stock and need cash by next Tuesday, you sell it, and the money lands in your account within days. If you own a house and need cash by next Tuesday, you're looking at months of listings, showings, negotiations, and closing costs that can eat a meaningful chunk of the sale price. Real estate gets called an investment, but functionally, it often behaves more like a large, illiquid asset that happens to sometimes appreciate, which matters enormously the moment life throws you something unexpected. So far, this has all been mechanics, but there's a piece of this comparison almost nobody puts in the same conversation, and it might be the most important one. A stock index fund spreads your money across hundreds, sometimes thousands, of companies, across every major industry, across the entire economy. A rental property is the opposite. One house, one neighborhood, one local job market, one climate risk, one buyer pool, if you ever need to sell. One house versus 500 companies. Say it like that, and the diversification gap becomes obvious in a single sentence. If a factory that employs half the town shuts down, or a major employer relocates, or a flood hits that insurance no longer fully covers, that risk doesn't get diversified away, it lands entirely on you, concentrated in a single asset you can't sell quickly. This is the trade-off almost nobody frames clearly. Real estate can offer higher effective returns through leverage and cash flow, but it does so by concentrating risk in exactly the way stocks, held properly, are designed to avoid. Taxes complicate things further, and neither side wins as cleanly as people claim. Homeowners often get preferential treatment on gains, and rental owners can typically deduct mortgage interest, depreciation, and repairs. Stocks in ordinary accounts don't get most of that, though retirement accounts shelter gains their own way. It depends on the country, the account, the hold period. Which is exactly why real estate always wins on taxes, falls apart the moment someone actually checks. Then there's the input almost every online debate quietly ignores: time. A stock portfolio, once built, asks nothing further of you. A rental property is closer to running a small business: screening tenants, handling repairs, staying current on landlord-tenant law, absorbing the occasional dispute that costs more in stress than in money. Some people genuinely enjoy that hands-on involvement. Others hire a property manager and hand over a slice of the return to remove themselves from it entirely. Either way, that labor is real, and it almost never makes it into the simple return comparisons people argue about online. So, who actually ends up with more? The person with the rental or the person with the index fund? The honest answer is that both paths have built enormous wealth for enormous numbers of people through genuinely different mechanisms. Real estate has tended to reward people who used leverage carefully, held through downturns instead of panic selling, and treated the property like an operating asset rather than a passive one. Stocks have tended to reward people who stayed diversified, kept costs low, and simply let decades of compounding do the work without interference. And the failure mode looks different too. Over-leveraged real estate in a downturn can wipe someone out faster and more completely than a diversified portfolio typically does. An all-stock strategy carries its own risk. An investor panicking at exactly the wrong moment, selling low, and locking in a loss that time would otherwise have recovered. What the data doesn't support is the confident one-line answer either side of this argument usually gives. Real estate always wins because of leverage, ignores what leverage does in the other direction. Stocks always win on returns, ignores that raw index returns and a leveraged property's effective return were never measuring the same thing to begin with. Both claims survive online because they're short, shareable, and happen to confirm whatever the person already owns. So maybe the real question was never which investment is better, it was always which mistakes can you actually survive. A stock portfolio forgives almost every mistake except panic. A leveraged property forgives almost nothing except patience. Neither one is magic. Neither one is a shortcut. They're simply different machines, built to do the same job in very different ways. And the honest comparison was never about picking a winner. It's about knowing which set of trade-offs you're actually built to hold.